Hey, welcome into Dog Walk Talk. Took the week off post July 4th holiday. A lot of vacation, PTO, craziness going on, but we'll get back into a good rhythm here as we get into football season in earnest. On this week's episode, I'm going to start off with Jake Roos talking about 8,000 Georgia football commitments over the past couple weeks. And then Palmer Toms will join me on the back end of this episode. We just learned Georgia's SEC Media Days attendees today as we record on Tuesday, July 12th. Obviously, we knew that Kirby Smart would be in the fold, but quarterback Stetson Bennett, edge rusher Nolan Smith, and offensive lineman Cedric Van Pran will represent the Dogs in Atlanta, so we'll get to that. But first, let's start off with the Georgia commit to the G movement. Jake, really spread out across three different recruiting classes over the past couple weeks.
Yeah, you don't necessarily anticipate some of that. I mean, it's hard to peg a class 2 years down the road, especially in the NIL era, right? I mean, it seems crazy to me that we're talking about kids that far down the road when kids we feel like are locks, 3 and 4 days out of their commitment are ending up in other places. So 2 years is a little bit more difficult to swallow, certainly when you're talking about solidity in a commitment. But Georgia has had quite a run here. I think it's been one of the better ones they've had. Those official visits, obviously, for the summer paying off. And Kirby Smart and company definitely have to be pleased about that. A lot of priority targets have come into the fold. And like you said, I mean, you're expanding that reach across multiple classes, and I do think that can be advantageous for you in going ahead and starting to set the stage. You can get guys to go ahead and be working on your behalf, recruiting their friends, going to camps, and sort of spreading the word about Georgia football for you and what these coaches are like.
I'm not an expert like you are. I don't stay, with my ear to the ground on all these commitments and, the ins and outs of these kids' lives and their camps and all that stuff. But I will say, I mean, I've covered the team now for 10 years professionally, and I can't, I was having a hard time thinking back to a summer stretch of, this many commitments in this short of a time span.
Yeah, I guess I've been doing this for about 8 years now, and I don't know that I've got one that I would necessarily point to, just right off the top of my head anyway. But recruiting's like that. It's streaky, and it goes in big bunches. And, I think what we've become accustomed to, or at least I have, I think over the last couple of years, is Georgia kind of going deeper into the cycle. I think that a lot of times we've seen them kind of come out of the summer and people sort of wringing their hands and saying, oh my God, where do things stand? How is Georgia going to make up ground? And then, that's where the Kirby the closer thing comes into play. And, that's how he sort of earned that reputation is when it's closer to signing day, you see a lot more activity on Georgia's front initially. I think in this era, you're seeing everything's just so different, man. I mean, like I said, the NIL thing has really thrown everybody for a loop. And I think that that's true of the kids as much as it is the programs and the coaches themselves. And so, there's hype that's part of it. I think that, it makes sense if you want to build your brand further, right? You want to come in when there's excitement being generated. Maybe you don't want to necessarily be the guy to sort of launch that off. And, I think to some degree, maybe Georgia has not forced the hands of these kids, but maybe kind of given a wink and a nod to say, hey, all right, we missed on Arch Manning. Let's take this to the next level and go out and get some guys that can really bolster this class and show where we can be. So it has been a weird time for sure, but a lot of talent in the fold.
So since we spoke last on the show, Daniel Harris, 2023 cornerback, 4-star, Nye Carr, 2024 wide receiver, fast as hell, 2024 tight end Landon Thomas, 4-star, and then there was 2023 linebacker Raylan Wilson. Kind of hinted about him on past episodes, really being interested in Georgia, and then flipping his commitment from Michigan to the Dogs. And then last night, 2025 running back Jabri Wallace Coleman, who hasn't even registered a star rating just yet because he is new on the scene recruiting-wise, but I'll let you have the floor here. What are your, big picture thoughts on that group And if you have any specific guys that you really want to dive deep in, go for it. But there's a lot for Georgia fans to be excited about with that group, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think first off, you mentioned Daniel Harris, probably the guy that would be the oldest of this group, and he hasn't been in long. I mean, it's just over a week now at this point. But Harris was a priority guy for Georgia throughout this, and a big testament, I think, to Fran Brown. An excellent job by him. That's a guy that Harris knew from his time at Rutgers. Brown is doing some incredible work in that South Florida area, really helping Georgia reestablish themselves there after, they took a couple of hits. I mean, we'll call it what it is. I mean, James Coley was an ace in the hole for Georgia in South Florida. Fran Brown has that kind of relationships down there, and he's a guy who can go into the Northeast and pull it out. But, Daniel Harris was a guy Ohio State really coveted. Penn State felt really good about. So definitely a guy that I think that they were excited to get as a part of this class, a big priority for them, and a guy that, On3 ranks very, very highly, especially compared to the rest of the industry. So definitely go check that out. You mentioned the 224 guys. Oh, man, I love those guys. I love the tape on those guys. Nykar, like you said, fast as hell. And I talked to his coach, Sean Calhoun, down there at Colquitt County. Gave some really great insight on Nye and said, what people don't realize and maybe don't give enough credit to, the kid's, he's on the smaller side of things, 5'10", 5'11". I mean, that's not a huge problem at the wide receiver position, but he's not the biggest guy, and I think that we see that trend kind of emerging, a lot of tight ends and such, but Carr has super long arms, and he said this kid's wearing like 2XL, 3XL gloves. So he's got Mickey Mouse hands attached to those big sticks. He said he's just able to reel it off. Go watch the tape on the kid. That's what I tell people on him. This is a kid that it pops every time. And Colquitt County not playing scrubs, man. I mean, they're playing the best of the best in the state of Georgia, and they'll play anybody, anywhere, anytime. They don't care. So Nykar, I think, an outstanding get for Georgia. And then his teammate, Landon Thomas, comes into the fold soon thereafter. Number 1 tight end currently, according to the On3 consensus. And another kid whose game I love. What I love about both of those guys, very versatile players. I think of Nye as a guy who could sort of play like that Mecole Hardman role. You could split him out wide. You could throw him in the slot. You could take him and put him on a sweep. He's not going to have any problem with that. I mean, Calhoun mentioned the possibility of using him as a wildcat quarterback and said he thought he would be very effective there. Landon Thomas, that kind of player as well from the tight end position. A guy who can be split out. He can inline block, great hands, great speed, just a total package. And a guy that Todd Hartley was after hard early on. Georgia really, really lucky to have those two guys in the fold, especially after losing their only 2024 commit. I think that those two guys are going to be compelling. And somebody on the board mentioned this, and I think it's interesting. The idea of Georgia sort of approaching the 24 class as opposed to chasing the quarterback the whole time. Let's build the skill players around this guy and then see who we can lure with the guys around him. And I think that there's a little bit of a hint of that. I mean, if you're a 24 guy and you're looking at Georgia's only 2 commits and it's the number 1 tight end and a 4-star top 30 player in Nykar, those are some impressive weapons to be working with. You move on from the 24 guys into Raylan Wilson. What can be said that hasn't been said about Raylan Wilson? Everybody loves what this kid's about. Again, another turn on the tape guy. 125 plus tackles last year, like 17 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, couple of forced fumbles, returns kicks and punts. Great snap anticipation. Was Georgia, as far as I'm aware, and based on everything I've heard, was Georgia's top prospect at the inside linebacker position. Bar none, no questions asked. Wouldn't have mattered if they had 40 guys in the class. Raylan Wilson had a spot. He was the apple of Georgia's eye throughout this, and they are thrilled to get him into the fold. And then you mentioned, Jabri Wallace Coleman comes in for the 25 class.
As someone said on the dog walk board, it's good to hear that Georgia's in his top teams at this point, because that's kind of how that feels, right?
Exactly. Though, I've got a story coming with the kid, and I encourage people to read it, because I asked him straight out. I said, look, man, you're a young guy. People are going to doubt this. People are going to have a lot of concerns. They're not going to think that this is to be taken very seriously. What would you say to them? And he said, I'm honored to be committed to Georgia, And I've been raised to stand on my decisions, and that's what I plan to do. Now, obviously there's a lot of time to go on that, but that's an encouraging thing to hear, at least. I mean, it's
I respect the
that
mentality. I respect it, and I'm
Right.
not going to doubt him or I'm not going to disrespect him if he changes his mind. I mean, that's a long time to go, but in this day and age, these kids, I'm starting to sound like Clint Eastwood on Gran Torino, get off my lawn, but commitment doesn't really mean as much, right? So
No
if he
doubt.
has that mindset, that's pretty admirable.
No, I agree. I agree completely. And you got to think, too, Georgia has some pretty nice representatives from Philadelphia that'll be in his ear. DeAndre Swift, Mark Webb. You got Tyke Smith, who played at the same high school that Wallace Coleman is at right now. So pretty natural connection there. A guy that they'll be able to, let host and let him hang around, kind of get a feel. So, Philly's done well for Georgia, and perhaps they'll take that into account. But it's been an insane run of commits, and I think we're on the verge of another one, to be honest with you.
A little tease there, Jake. So I want to switch to the quarterback position with Alabama picking up another quarterback commit in this class, Dylan Lonergan out of Georgia. The Dogs are not in his top teams on On3 as a destination that he was even considering, but is it too simple to say that Georgia was all in on Arch Manning, and did they burn bridges, or were they comfortable with Arch or bust?
I think it's much more the latter. I think that it is much more the case that Georgia is okay with where they stand quarterback-wise. I think that they now go back to the drawing board, and I think that you'll see them perhaps look into this 23 class, but from a sense of maybe what happened with Andrew Paul last year, where it was a last-minute kind of surprise, a guy who emerges after strong senior film, and bursts onto the radar, if they're going to take a guy. Now, currently, I'll go ahead and give up one of my secrets of my mock class. I'm doing a position-by-position mock class over at DawgsHQ, just kind of where we think things stand right now. I said I don't think they're going to take a quarterback. To me, there's not a clear option out there. I don't think that there's a guy that they've got circled. And from those I've spoken to, I don't think that that's a huge concern. I think that they are okay with that notion. I think that, as much as they would have loved to have had Arch, a lot of it was, we can pour all in here because it won't matter if we miss. And I think that they sort of took that mentality, and I think that's kind of where it's at right now. So it'd be interesting to see, like I said, as things continue to go along, as senior years progress, do they sort of take a different approach? But as of right now, I don't think Georgia's too worried about that quarterback position recruiting for 2023.
I think that'll make a lot of Georgia fans feel a lot better if they haven't already moved on from Arch Manning, which hopefully they have with this recent run of commits. Last thing for you, Jake, looking outside of Georgia, I'm looking at the Florida Gators fan base over the past couple weeks, and they've been itchy. They've been anxious for some good recruits, good commits out of Billy Napier. And Napier kind of had this Ole Miss Tim Tebow moment where he kind of rallied the collectives, rallied the Florida boosters and said, we've got to recruit better. I'm going to recruit better. We're committing to getting a great run of commits for the Florida Gators. And I watched Florida go from whining about not having any good commitments to picking up a pretty solid little run here. I don't even want to say concern, because as I wrote on the Dog Walk board, if Georgia fans are feeling anxious about this, 4 commitments are not going to turn the tide and where this Georgia-Florida rivalry is right now. The Dogs are dominating the Gators in a way that they really haven't since Vince Dooley was the coach in this short sample size of Kirby Smart's career. But how's Billy Napier doing compared to Dan Mullen? And do you feel like it could actually translate into a little bit more competition on the field in Jacksonville?
I'm going to say right now, I think that it's slightly better than Mullen, but not greatly. I don't think that this is a huge change from what we've seen. Now, they've picked up some nice commits. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not hating on Florida's class by any means. I think that some of these guys are really good players. Eugene Wilson is an outstanding wide receiver. TJ Searcy's a guy Georgia checked in on. Isaiah Nixon was a pretty good get for them as well. Sharif Denson is a highly thought of cornerback for the class, certainly. And they're going to continue to see runs like that, I think, when you're talking about Corey Raymond at the head of that defensive backfield. Guys are going to be naturally attracted to him. They got Trayon Webb, who was a Georgia commit at one time, and then he was an Oklahoma commit at one time. And so he's kind of bounced around a little bit. But, Florida's got work to do, man. And I think that a lot of it right now is they're in a tough spot because, like you said, you're having to rally the boosters and the collectives, and you don't have recent success to show. So it's not like a Tennessee situation where they came out guns blazing on NIL and said, hey, this is the way that we're going to handle this. And it's not a Georgia, Alabama, or, pick your poison, Clemson, Ohio State situation where you've got the recent success where kids know, okay, I can go here and I can be drafted and be a highly drafted guy and make my money that way. You're in a catch-22 if you're not one of those two things right now. And I think that it was a smart move on his part to go out and hit up the collective and try to rally those bases, because I think that there's work to be done. There's no question about it.
Yeah, speaking of NIL and recruiting and everything going on in the sport right now, On3 just announced a partnership with Influencer to fortify and build and just create a better resource for fans, but also for players and coaches as it relates to NIL. So if y'all are curious about that, I'll admit I'm still learning. I think we all are. I think if you feel like you're an expert on NIL right now, you're probably a little too confident in that, but it's a new frontier for sure. And On3, which is guiding the ship here at DawgsHQ, is going places, and NIL is at the forefront of where we want to go. So if you're curious about that, you can check out at On3NIL for our announcement about that. Pretty exciting things ahead there. Jake, appreciate your insight as always, man, and look forward to the season starting up, man. Summer's kind of winding down. It's time to shift gears and get our heads in the fall, man. Thanks as always.
Hard to believe, man. Yeah, it's an exciting time, Wes. Georgia with a lot of, like I said, there's a lot more to come. In fact, over the course of the next week, if I were a Georgia fan, I'd be having my ears on. So keep tuned in.
Dang, man, I'm. You can't just drop a tease like that on the way out the door, Jake. I can't wait to find out what it is, dude. I'll talk to you soon.
See you, bud.
All right, welcome back to Dog Walk Talk. Palmer Tom's in the catbird seat with me now. Palmer, we just found out who's going to SEC Media Days for Georgia. The Dogs are on a pretty interesting day. We got Sam Pittman in Arkansas. We've got Billy Napier in Florida. Kirby Smart, obviously. And Kentucky's dude, Mark Stoops. And he is fighting an NIL battle right now, which, I feel like all these coaches have an interesting storyline. They always do. But Kirby's is the best one you want to have, which is the defending national championship head coach. You just wrote minutes ago, as we record here on Tuesday, July 12th, that Kirby's up for a Coach of the Year watch list. We love these watch lists. There's a bunch of those. But we also found out today who's going to SEC Media Days for Georgia. Stetson Bennett, Nolan Smith, and Cedric Van Pran. Pretty solid group of guys. What are you looking forward to the most out of that group?
Yeah, like you said, we love those watch lists. Those really help fill the content in the slow month of July. But like you said, it speeds up here pretty quickly with Media Days next week. Shocker that Kirby Smart is on the watch list for the Coach of the Year. I don't think that comes as a surprise to anybody. I don't think most of these watch lists will come as a surprise to many people. Most of those are scheduled to come out next week and the next week. So we're going to be heavy on watch lists here, but don't think that those are going to be the talking points at SEC Media Days. What stands out to me in today's announcement with Stetson, Nolan, and Cedric as Georgia's three representatives, First of all, is that they are bringing Stetson Bennett. I think that is always a pretty telling sign, whether you're going to bring your quarterback or not. Obviously everyone wants to talk to the quarterback, but does the coach, does the program think that that person is one of the best three representatives of their team? And for Stetson to be one of those guys, obviously people are going to have a lot of questions for him. Why is he back for this season? He was honest with his answers in the spring, and I think all of us as journalists appreciate his honesty, but sometimes the coach may not appreciate somebody that speaks off the cuff a little bit. So, for Stetson to be there, I think that's a big sign, in terms of where he stands as a leader, where he stands with this team. I think Kirby made it pretty clear this spring that Stetson was going to be the guy, even after Carson Beck maybe had a better G-Day performance. So I think that Stetson being there is obviously a big sign. Nolan being there as one of the leaders of this defense. The other guys that I may have considered there would have been Chris Smith, as a senior. But I think Nolan has always been very well spoken and understands, the power of his words. Jalen Carter and Keely Ringo, obviously two of the better players on that defense, but they are juniors, and you typically give this kind of experience to a senior that hasn't done it. Cedric Van Pran is a junior, though, actually redshirt sophomore, entering his third season. But for him to go as one of the vocal leaders on that offensive line, I think back to the interview we did with him this spring, and he talked about the chip on the shoulder that this offensive line group had, after that Michigan game, watching the Michigan offensive line win the Joe Moore Award for the best offensive line. The chip on the shoulder that this group is going to have, I think that's going to be a talking point for him. But again, another really well-spoken guy that understands the power of his words. I think that these are three guys that certainly are going to raise a lot of conversations out of next Wednesday.
Yeah, I had someone ask me recently if I was going to be surprised if Stetson didn't go, and I said no, just because when Stetson talks, he's not the average quarterback, and that's not a diss to Stetson, but he shoots from the hip when he's on the field, and he shoots from the hip when he's behind a microphone, and you never know where his sound bites are going to go. And for Kirby Smart, a guy that likes things to be predictable, quite frankly, Stetson's not predictable behind a mic. So I'm very interested to see what happens when we hear from Stetson. And I don't think Georgia couldn't have brought him, though. As much as Kirby might be, I don't want to say uncomfortable, but as much as Kirby might prefer for Stetson to be a little bit more buttoned up with his answers, you can't not bring the guy. I mean, he's the national championship offensive MVP. He's the leader of your team. He is the, QB1. And I think Kirby's had more seasons where he didn't announce a QB1 or didn't roll with a QB1 going into the season than he has. And he has it this year with Stetson. So you got to keep that confidence in him, and that includes opportunities like SEC Media Days. But I'm excited to hear from him. I'm excited to hear from Nolan Smith. He is a player that had so much acclaim coming in as a recruit, and I don't even know if he's fully lived up to it yet. Last season, he showed glimpses for sure, but now he's the guy. There's no safety net. He is the leader at that position, even though Jalen Carter arguably is the leader of the entire defense with his play. Nolan Smith seems to be the vocal leader of the defense, and that's why he has to be there. And then Cedric being there, as a redshirt sophomore, as you mentioned, I think is a huge testament to his cool, his calm, his composure. 15 games, 15 starts for him as a redshirt freshman. I mean, that shows you everything you need to know about him in that championship run for the Dogs. So I read about him that he is an art major as well, so hopefully he can reveal a little bit more about himself as a person. And I think these SEC Media Days give us an opportunity as media members to learn a little bit more about these guys as people. There aren't necessarily game week questions that we feel like we have to ask. There aren't, the performance-related questions that we have to ask. It's a lot more about the magnitude of the season, the individuals that have been chosen to come. If you get picked to go to SEC Media Days, you might as well be a team captain. I mean, you're carrying a lot for your team. So an exciting time in Atlanta, and thankfully we don't have to drive all the way to Hoover, Alabama, to get our quotes and hear from Kirby and learn about this year's team. But the backdrop of this team coming in as national champions, think about a lot of years about the national champions coming into SEC Media Days. They have the spotlight squarely on them. I feel like this year Greg Sankey has the spotlight squarely on him. Maybe Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher, but it seems like that was diffused at the SEC spring meetings. They kind of showed how they're going to handle that, which is we're not going to talk about our public falling out anymore, even though everyone's seen it happen already. With conference realignment and the state of college football, with NIL still being something that everyone is figuring out, Greg Sankey has a lot of questions to answer. This isn't just Greg Sankey step up to the podium, run through your minutes, run through how excited you are for the season. This is Greg Sankey. You might be getting grilled a little bit more than you normally are. So when you think about the conference as a whole, Palmer, what do you expect to hear from the media, and what do you expect the tone, the tenor of SEC Media Days to be when we're there in Atlanta next week?
Yeah, I mean, and looking back at last year's event, it was at this time last year that Texas and Oklahoma, that rumor started to swirl, and that those wheels started to turn. So, if as we talk about conference realignment being one of the big talking points in all of college football, I know Big 12 has their media days this week. Sure, that's going to be a topic of conversation there. The future, what the future of that conference looks like, with Oklahoma and Texas currently, what the future of those programs look like as they make the move to the SEC, but also the future of that conference without those two blue bloods in the game of football. I think that's certainly going to be a talking point when the Pac-12 takes their turn at media days, and the ACC and the Big Ten, and now you've got the SEC. Hasn't made a move. They haven't had any teams make a move, from the conference. They haven't added to the conference this year, but it's certainly going to be a topic of conversation given the magnitude of the decisions that they made last year to add Oklahoma and Texas to the conference. So I certainly think that that's going to be one of the big talking points. I think NIL is going to be a big talking point. We're just over a year into that now, and different states have different policies. At the high school level, at the college level, it's certainly shaping a lot of the discussions.
Division realignment, which we were talking about a few weeks ago, which seems like 8 years ago at this point because so many other things have changed in the game. But that's a huge one that affects the SEC maybe a lot sooner than a lot of this other stuff does.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And so, I think that the overall health of the SEC is going to be what Sankey gets grilled on. Where these coaches, the differences that these coaches have with their stances on NIL. The transfer portal is obviously going to be a topic of conversation. It's the same things that were talked about at spring meetings, just with a new tone to it, considering the moves that have been made in college football recently.
Yeah. I don't even know what to predict. I don't know what to predict in college football right now. I feel like I am just along for the ride, and I hate reacting to things when it comes to covering, Georgia or covering the sport. But I can't really help but feel any other kind of way right now. We saw the report, I think, yesterday from Saturday Down South that the SEC isn't interested in adding any more teams. I've also heard, from Andy Staples at The Athletic that, maybe things are calming down right now because a lot of people are on vacation. I don't know. I don't know where the truth
of course, there's
lies.
been the report. There's been the report that North Carolina, Virginia, Clemson, and Florida State would be interested, and
that's gone quiet. It's like
and that's gone quiet. And so, for all we know, that what we're talking about now could be dated conversation next week.
Oh, it will
by
be.
the time that Greg Sankey takes the podium. So. It's certainly going to be interesting. It's an exciting time, not only because we get to hear from so many focal figures in college football, but it's an exciting time because it means that the season is coming up. Once media days get going, obviously it's a continuation of talking season to an extent, but there's a different feeling once you've gotten past media days. Everything feels so much closer. You can see the light at the end of the tunnel that is summer, that is July. Preseason camp comes around, 2 weeks after? Not even 2 weeks after in the case of Georgia. They'll start about a week and a half after Kirby Smart and company take the stand. And then, preseason camp lasts all of 4 or 5 weeks, and before you know it, the season is rolling around. So, obviously it's an exciting time, in the sport. It's a scary time in the sport for some folks, but it's certainly an exciting time in the SEC for Georgia, for us as media members.
Yep, it is certainly go time. I wrote today on DawgsHQ a premium article for our subscribers about what I would like to ask the people that are going for Georgia when we go at SEC Media Days, if I'm given the chance to do so. And I'm sure my questions will change between now and then, but this was just kind of my gut feeling, so you can go ahead and check that out for a preview of our coverage. And you can sign up for free over at DawgsHQ.com for 7 days if you are a freeloader listening to the episode. We still love you, but we also encourage you to check out the premium options we have over there, including our message board and our inside info, including recruiting like you had from Jake Roos a few moments ago. Palmer, you are working on a series leading up to the season, 22 for 22, ranking the 22 most important players on Georgia's team for the 2022 football season. It works out pretty well, but I assume that there are more defensive players than offensive, if the math even works out that way. But with Georgia being stacked, in that manner, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but what are you learning as you put this list together? What are your criteria? What are you assembling here in this list of 22 dogs?
Yeah, I think, like you said, it typically comes out to be pretty even. I think offense might have the lead this year.
Okay. I'm happy to be proven wrong. It's exciting.
Which says a lot about where the strengths of this team are, where the questions about this team are. I feel like we know a lot more about the offense, considering everybody that's coming back on that side of the ball and everybody that is leaving on the other side of the ball, the defense, of course. Obviously, when you're doing this list, some of the toughest decisions don't come at the top; they come at the bottom, because you've got to leave some guys out. When you set a hard number like 22, whoever's 23, 24, 25, sorry, man, you're in the best of the rest. And so, I put out that some of those guys that are still very important to this team. There are more than 22 guys that are important to this team. Breaking news, guys. And so, I think that what gets a lot of the attention is going to be at the top of the list. Who comes in at number 1, who cracks the top 5, the top 10. But some of the toughest decisions were made at the bottom of that list. Who just missed the cut? Who came in at 22? Is this guy that's at 21? Is he more worthy than the 23rd, 24th guy? What exactly defines importance? Because that's really hard to do here. Every player, as I say in the intro to the articles, it's different with every player. Some of them are really important for their leadership abilities. So, what they can provide to the guys that are younger behind them. That may not mean that they're more talented than the guys that missed the list or were lower down on the list. Other guys, it's important that they stay healthy. You want to take a look at number 22 there. First guy on the list, Aryan Smith, must stay healthy is the biggest note that I have with him. And he could end up not being all that important if he doesn't stay healthy. But if he does stay healthy, I think the ceiling is really high for a guy like him. And then there's guys that you've got questions about that, some of them didn't make the list. I think if we were having a conversation about the most important questions for Georgia to answer going into this season, it would be a very different list than the most important players specifically, because one of the biggest questions for Georgia is who is that number two, who are the two offensive guards, who's that number two linebacker, that number two safety, who steps up on the defensive line. You don't want to identify, it's really tough. If I took the easy way out, I could have just said, the number one player on this list, number one most important player on this list, it's the number two safety, or it's the number, who steps up at inside linebacker, the rotation of guys there. But I went the direction of singling out specific players, and so that makes it tough to say that a Xavier Truss or a Tate Ratledge or a Warren Erickson is really all that important, because we're having the conversation of which of those three is going to be a starter. Throw in Devin Willock as well, as another option there at guard. You want to talk about the inside linebackers, the safety. There's so many options there, and so some of those guys missed the list. They did make the best of the rest. There's plenty of guys there that point out. I even pointed out the long snappers there. Roos wrote an article the other day on the countdown to kickoff that, giving some love to the long snapper, William Mote. I included William Mote and Payne Walker there on the list of best of the rest, because they are important to Georgia's success, just not necessarily in my top 22. So it's an exciting thing to do every year. I really enjoy doing it every offseason. It sparks some conversations with some friends. They're like, hey, man, where's this guy? Why is he not higher? Why is he so low? Why is this guy so high? Are you, higher on him than some other folks? And, it's an exciting time, to say the least. Great filler for content, but also, spark some good conversations with friends on the board. Like you said, if you're a free rider here, strongly encourage you to subscribe so that you can get involved in some of those conversations.
Well, I can't wait to see Brett Thorson on the list. He's my favorite player going into the season. And one thing you said about Aryan Smith, I've seen Aryan show up on a lot of people's lists of, potential breakout players or potential breakout wide receivers in 2022, which I think says a lot about his health over the last couple seasons, because Georgia fans know how dangerous he is. I am really just flummoxed, for lack of a better word, on the lack of A.D. Mitchell showing up on any, whether it's SEC wide receivers for 2022 or, longer list of national wide receivers in 2022. I mean, a freshman that makes the impact he did in the national championship, and not just the national championship, but throughout Georgia's season. I'm just scratching my head. I don't know what people are missing about AD, but I feel like he is really primed to have one of those types of seasons where people know who he is at the end of the year.
Yeah, and I'll give you a hint, Wes. I'm high on AD. He is included in this 22, and he's going to be pretty high up on that list. But I think the reason that you're seeing some of those questions is because of
and
what
I know
Georgia
there are other
has
guys.
at tight
Look,
end.
Yeah, okay, the tight end thing makes sense. And I know that there are other really good wide receivers in college football this season. So I'm not taking away from them. I'm not, just over here looking through Georgia rose-colored glasses. But it is just kind of confusing, I'll say.
Yeah. No, it absolutely is. It's really hard when you've got, 3 tight ends, 4 tight ends if you want to include Oscar Delp, but 3, college-proven tight ends, guys that have succeeded at the college level already in Brock Bowers, Eric Gilbert, Darnell Washington. It's really hard to, be one of the top pass catchers in an offense that features weapons like that. It's why I've it's so far in the countdown. I'm 5 players in, and I've had 3 wide receivers already. So none of those being A.D. Mitchell. He's going to be a little bit higher on the list. So you're welcome, Wes.
Okay, well, I'm excited to hear it. If you can't tell, I'm getting pretty fired up about these watch lists over here, Palmer. Thank you as always. Can't wait to catch up in person at SEC Media Days next week. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a circus. It always is. And I'm just glad we're all back doing it in real life and in Atlanta, so that drive isn't quite as long for us Georgia boys. Thanks, Palmer. We'll catch up soon, my man. All right. Thank you again for listening to Dog Walk Talk. As I've mentioned, hit follow and give us a rating and a review. And also encourage you to check out DawgsHQ Premium for free for 7 days if you don't already. This week is a great time to do it so you can get all of our insights from SEC Media Days as well as potentially a commitment, as Jake Roos hinted earlier on in the show. Hope you all have a great week and a great rest of the summer. It's almost football season. We'll catch you soon.